He used to be the guy who always showed up, the one who sent the first text, who remembered birthdays, who stayed until the end, even when no one asked him to. He believed in effort, in presence, in the idea that love meant showing up even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. But one day, he looked around and realized something heavy. Nobody was showing up for him, not in the same way, not with the same heart. And it wasn't one big event that changed him. It was small things, subtle things, moments when he gave a little more and received a little less. It took years, but eventually he just stopped offering himself where he wasn't seen, stopped calling, stopped explaining, stopped being the one who always tried, and nobody noticed. That's the part that hit the deepest, not that he pulled away, but that when he did, no one reached out to pull him back. It started with a quiet, not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that sits with you in the morning when your phone doesn't buzz, and nobody asks how you're doing. At first, he thought it was just a phase. Maybe people were busy. Maybe they'd circle back. But they didn't. They had gotten used to him being available, to him being the one who followed up, who made the plans, who remembered the details. When he stopped doing those things, the connections faded. Not with anger, not with drama, just faded, and in that fading, he found clarity. He wasn't important. He was convenient. That truth doesn't shout. It whispers. And it whispered to him every day until he couldn't ignore it anymore. He never wanted much. Not praise, not attention, just mutual care, a shared effort, a small, simple kind of love. He wasn't complicated. He just wanted to feel like he mattered not for what he did, but for who he was when he wasn't doing anything at all. But kindness, unchallenged, becomes routine. And routine, when only one person holds it up, starts to feel like a prison. He wasn't appreciated. He was expected. There's a big difference. People called him loyal, dependable, solid. But not once did anyone ask, "Are you okay?" Not once did anyone say, "You always show up, what can I do for you?" They were happy to receive. And he was afraid to stop giving, because when your identity is built on being the strong one, you start to believe that you don't get to fall apart. But he did, quietly, internally, without anyone noticing. It wasn't dramatic. No big speech. No final message. No confrontation. He just didn't show up. Didn't text back. Didn't initiate. Didn't try to keep things going that only he was holding up. And the world stayed quiet. Almost too quiet. No one asked, "Are you okay?" No one said, "We miss you." No one noticed the absence of the man who had once been the presence holding everything together. That silence confirmed what he suspected. He had been overwatering relationships that wouldn't have survived a drought. He had been building bridges to people who were never planning to cross. So he stopped performing, stopped explaining, stopped hoping that maybe this time someone would see the effort and meet him halfway. And as he stepped back, he found something unexpected. Peace. It didn't come all at once, but it came, and it whispered something back to him. You were never hard to love. You were just loving people who didn't know how to receive it. He didn't ghost anyone. He just stopped forcing conversations that felt like work. He stopped filling in the blanks when others offered nothing. There were no angry messages, no sarcastic remarks, no "you changed" kind of exits. Only silence, heavy, unapologetic. At first, it felt wrong, like he was being selfish, like he owed people his presence, even when they no longer earned it. But silence has a way of sorting out the real from the convenient, because the ones who care, they notice, the ones who don't, they never did. And that's where his healing began, not in being louder, but in being absent from places that only drained him. His mornings changed. No more rushing to respond. No more checking if he was needed. No more trying to stay ahead of everyone's emotions. He drank his coffee slowly, sometimes in silence, sometimes with music that had no words, just rhythm, just breath. He cleaned his space, not because someone was visiting, but because it made him feel calm. He walked alone, not because he had no one, but because being alone didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like coming home to a version of himself he had ignored for too long. The man who didn't have to prove, didn't have to please, didn't have to perform, just be. And in that being, he discovered something profound. He wasn't lonely. He was free. He stopped saying yes to everything, stopped attending events that drained him, stopped replying to people who only reached out when they needed something, not out of anger, not to make a point, but because peace was finally more important than being polite. His phone rang less. His calendar opened up. His world shrank, but his heart got quieter and stronger. People noticed. Some pulled away. Some complained. They said he was distant, colder, harder to reach. But they didn't understand. This version of him wasn't built for easy access. It was built for survival. He didn't need to be everywhere anymore. He didn't need to save anyone. His new boundaries weren't walls. They were filters. If you brought chaos, you didn't get through. If you brought peace, he welcomed you, softly, fully. But on his terms, he never yelled, never raised his voice, never demanded respect. He simply withdrew it from places that couldn't hold it. And that scared people. Because there is something unsettling about a man who doesn't need approval, who isn't desperate to be liked, who doesn't flinch when you leave. They called him cold, distant, detached. But the truth is, he had just stopped begging to be chosen. He stopped waiting for texts, stopped decoding mixed signals, stopped trying to read minds that never tried to understand his. He became quiet, and in that quiet, he became dangerous. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he was no longer emotionally available to be manipulated. That kind of strength makes people nervous, because you can't control a man who's already made peace with being alone. He didn't hate anyone. He didn't carry bitterness, but he did carry lessons. Quiet ones, heavy ones, etched into his chest like warnings. And the biggest one of all, that losing others never hurt as much as losing himself. That realization would lead to the moment he would never forget. The moment he finally said, "I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being someone I don't recognize just to make others comfortable." That truth would change everything. There was a time when the silence used to scare him. He thought being alone meant he had failed, that if no one was checking in, something was wrong with him. But one morning, as he sat in his garage, surrounded by tools and sunlight and dust, he realized something that stopped him cold. He wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. He was afraid of becoming that version of himself again. The version who said yes when he wanted to say no. The version who gave when he had nothing left. The version who smiled just to keep the room comfortable, even when his insides were collapsing. That man was kind, but he was also lost. He had built his identity around being useful, agreeable, low maintenance. But now, he knew the price. He had betrayed himself so many times just to make others feel safe. And this time he refused. He would rather walk through life misunderstood than repeat the quiet violence of self-abandonment. That realization wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks. It came with breath, with peace, with the steady beat of truth in his chest. From the outside, he looked the same, still helpful, still kind, still present when he chose to be. But something had changed, something unshakable. He no longer explained himself. He no longer asked for time, space, respect. He simply expected it. And if it wasn't offered, he moved on. Not in anger, but in alignment. He no longer chased conversations. He no longer waited for apologies. He no longer sat at tables where he felt like a guest instead of a man with a seat. This wasn't pride. This was healing. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one day and how steady your breath feels when no one's watching. He doesn't post about his peace. He doesn't preach his growth. He lives it. In every decision, In every no that protects his yes. In every relationship he lets die so that he doesn't have to. There's a different strength in the man who no longer performs. The kind of strength that doesn't need to be understood to be respected. He doesn't speak to be heard. He speaks when it matters. He doesn't show up to be seen. He shows up because he chooses to. And if you don't recognize him anymore, maybe it's because you only knew him when he was disappearing to make you comfortable. This version, he doesn't disappear. He stands. Quiet. Firm. Free. If you've ever walked away quietly, not out of bitterness, but because your heart was tired, you're not broken. You're building. If you've ever chosen peace over being understood, you're not weak. You're wiser now. There's a kind of man who no longer asks the world for permission to rest, to retreat, to heal. And maybe you're becoming him. If so, take your time. Drink your coffee slow. Answer your phone less. Let your silence teach people what your words no longer will. And know this, you don't have to explain peace to anyone who benefits from your chaos. If this story feels like yours, say it quietly in the comments. I'm not hard to love. I just stopped offering myself to people who didn't know what to do with it.